The Center for Procurement Excellence is a nonprofit member organization with a mission of educating, promoting, and advocating for better RFP processes. Join CPE today and make your RFPs faster and more transparent. Membership also includes discounts to all of our training and networking events. CPE hosts a variety of virtual and in-person networking and training events throughout the year. Visit our website to get signed up. CPE Speakers Bureau is available for your regional and national meetings and professional conferences. Contact us to learn more.
Welcome to Ask the RFP Doctor, CPE's monthly web series where we discuss the latest best practices in procurement and supply chain management.
So let's talk about organizing an evaluation matrix. The agenda for chatting through this is as follows. First, we'll just define what an evaluation matrix is, and we'll walk through procedures after that. So kind of how do you track evaluator scores, setting up your matrix, calculating things, and other reasons you might use a matrix beyond what we typically would think of. We'll talk about that too, and summarize things at the end before going into some breakout room discussion. So jumping straight to the definition of an evaluation matrix first is to define it. What this is basically just an organized method or tool to track and compile the evaluations across the different evaluation criteria you may have. Because normally in an RFP, you've got more than one criteria. You're marrying together cost and different qualifications or proposal elements. And you're doing that across all the competing proposals or firms who have responded. And you may have multiple evaluators as well that you're tracking. So that's basically all it is. To illustrate this, I'll go straight to an example, very simplified example, just for the purposes of getting the image in our minds. It might look something like this. So for example, what you've got here is your evaluation criteria on the left. In this case, we kept it super simple, just 4 criteria. I'm not saying these are the best criteria or anything like that. This is just to illustrate what we mean by an evaluation matrix. So maybe you're getting a proposal from your vendor on their approach to deliver your scope, their background qualifications. Maybe you're going to interview them or do a presentation or demo. Of course, you want to see their costs. You've got evaluation ratings in here. Maybe this is a simple 1 to 10 evaluation scale. So for example, firm 1 on their approach, they scored a 9.67 out of 10 average across your evaluation team, let's say. You got your raw dollars in there for their costs. That's kind of all your raw inputs. And then you have to allocate your points because you can see my weights in here. You've got 15% for the approach, 20% for qualifications, and so on. So those percentages ultimately add up to 100% of the total evaluation decision-making criteria. And we've got all the calculations going on of how we're allocating those points over on the right-hand side to get your overall results. So again, this is an overly simplified example. This is not a real example, just one made up for the purposes of quickly showing what a matrix looks like. Now, a couple opening remarks on this here before we proceed. In some procurement groups, you are, as procurement professionals, you are heavily involved in putting together an evaluation matrix. Sometimes the procurement group is tasked with tracking this themselves personally on behalf of the internal project team or business units or requester, department, agency, whatever your terminology is. Sometimes we in procurement are doing this for them and we're collecting their scores and tracking it. So they're not worried about doing all of this, but they're just getting the overall results at the end. Other procurement groups I have worked with, they don't touch this matrix at all. They basically say, hey, we checked that the proposals were on time, that they were compliant, and we pass those proposals over to our internal project team and evaluators, and they put together those scores however they want and come back with a recommendation. I think that most procurement groups are moving towards the former setup where you're pretty involved in putting together the matrix and helping people track things, and you're not quite as hands-off as that. But I do know that there are procurement groups out there for various reasons that just aren't quite as involved with the evaluation matrix piece. But we think it's a valuable and important tool to have in your toolbox and skill set as a procurement professional. At least that's what we think here at CPE. So where is a matrix like this used? Is if you are using this, right, you go across your normal timeline of initially you put together the scope and requirements for your project, you get that put into your RFP and advertise it, proposals come back in response, then you evaluate them, select, move into contract discussions. this is about the time where you're doing the matrix in detail, right? You're tracking scores and costs and totaling everything up, figuring out the selected proposal in the end. And also one of the extra uses of the matrix that we will talk about later is you can use the information from it to do, reporting out and summaries for executive approvals and so on. That can also be a big help. A best practice in our mind is that you actually put together your evaluation matrix back here. Like before you even publish that RFP, you should have a very clear plan of how you're going to evaluate. You should have a clear plan on what everything's worth, how it's going to come in, how it's going to be tracked, how you're going to handle the cost proposals that come back and so forth. You should know that before you press release. But once it's time to actually populate the matrix itself with results and costs and things like that, that's usually not till you get proposals back and are into the evaluation process itself. All right, procedures. So quickly running through procedures of putting together your matrix. So we'll go through 4 quick steps. The first one is, as I mentioned, back when you're putting together that RFP to begin with. So once you're organizing your RFP, and some of you have seen our other trainings and know that we have our own fancy format, not fancy, but specific format and structure, 7 major sections of the RFP and in their particular order, that one of those sections will be your evaluation procedures. Now, in your evaluation procedures, this is where you're telling the vendor community, hey, here's how we're going to score you. Here's how we're going to evaluate you. Here's how we're going to decide what it is that is the decision-making criteria for picking the winner. Usually in an RFP, you've got some amount of both costs and qualifications going on here. So you're putting together the financial proposal and telling the vendors what you want to see there, plus all the various qualifications or proposal elements that you might be scoring as a committee or tracking in some other way to get a measure of the vendor's proposed qualifications. Now, today, we are not really getting, excuse me, into some of the details of like which criteria and things like that. What we're really going to do is we'll just kind of focus on the matrix as a tool, because when you're here and you're dealing with both money and financials and qualifications or proposal elements, you're in a best value scenario where putting both of those things together and combining them to a grand total and figuring out which vendor we want to select. That's the overall setup there. Now, if you want more information about like best value and the fact that, yeah, this is not a low bid scenario, you don't really need an evaluation matrix if you're in a low bid scenario. It's just open up the bids and see what they look like. But in an RFP where you have different services and different fee structures, different financials, and you're marrying that together with the proposal, then there's more to track. It will point you to more resources on best value related content, as we did have that session back about a year ago, where we looked at some data on whether best value actually costs you more than low bid, and found that best values actually gets better performance results. We all know the issues with low bid of that upfront price or promise may not be how things actually turn out, and sometimes we can get hoodwinked. So for more details on that, check out the prior recording on our CPE RFP Doctor website. But the next step in putting together your matrix after you have your RFP developed is that in your RFP, you should be clearly publishing what your evaluation criteria are and have a good plan for what they're going to be worth. So, you might have a table, something like this, in your RFP saying, hey, here's the 4 criteria, here's what they're going to be worth. Again, I'm not saying these are a recommended set of criteria. I'm just doing these to match up with my prior example here, which had these 4 criteria and weights. If I jump back, that matches up here with the same table. That's all we're saying is you publish something like this table in your RFP, and then that would get populated over to your matrix that might look something like this as an example. Again, we're not talking about which criteria are the best today. We do have some prior videos on criteria we do recommend, but that's beyond the point here. Another thing that we recommend, by the way, is that your cost evaluation should never be worth more than 35% or a third of the evaluation. If you want reasoning for why you should keep costs lower than 35%, go check out that prior video from last year on why cost should be worth less, and often substantially less than 35%. But again, beyond our point for today. So Where you're at is if you've defined your evaluation criteria and the weights in your RFP, you've got your qualifications-based elements there in red, you've got your cost or financial elements there in green. We're going to put those together. Typically, how that's evaluated is the cost side is raw dollars. You're using some numerical submission of a percentage fee or a lump sum dollar value or maybe hourly rates or different ways you can be looking at cost, of course. That usually goes into your evaluation matrix as a number, the actual dollars or percentages and so forth. And then in general, not always, but in general, most organizations out there are having a committee, evaluation committee, score their qualifications-based elements in some way, shape, or form. That might be a committee of 3 to 7 or more people, depending upon the size of your project and how complex it is. And so that's, if you think about this, when you're in the evaluation stage, you've got multiple qualifications-based criteria. Each of them is going to be scored by between 3 to 7 or even more evaluation members on your committee. You've got at least one measure of cost if it's a lump sum or a percent fee, or oftentimes in RFPs, you have multiple different cost breakouts you need to be numerically accounting for. So it is a decent amount to track, and that's why a matrix can be so helpful. Number 3 in your procedures is to help feed your matrix with all of the raw information and scoring. Obviously, we recommend having good score sheets to track things across your evaluators. So absolutely use nice score sheets for them. There's a lot of ways to set them up. I'll flash up a few examples, not saying that any of these are the perfect best ones, but just as, for inspirational purposes. You might have something like this, hey, I've got different vendors here. We're going to do, in this case, a 1 to 10 or 0 to 10 evaluation score. You want comments or justification back from your committees, and they sign, signature, and dates there and submit to you. Keep it simple for them. And what you're really going to use for the matrix itself are the scores that you're going to enter in per evaluator. You can, different forms, for example, here's a potential interview setup for different vendors, maybe different things you want them to evaluate on an interview or a product demonstration with some comments and so forth. Another example, a bunch of different proposing firms, evaluation scores, pros and cons, things like that. Just different ways of doing it. What you really want for the purpose of the evaluation matrix are the scores themselves coming back from your evaluation team. That's what you're going to use. Now, today, not casting any judgment or recommendation on what specific evaluation score to use. You saw 0 to 10 or 1 to 10 in there. We know others who use 1 to 5 or 1, 5, 10. We've seen color codes, red, yellow, green. It's a military thing sometimes, and many more ways of doing this. Not saying which one's best, just whatever it is that you're doing. So, in a form like this shows 0 to 10. Whatever you're doing, you're just making sure this is neatly organized in an organized fashion, tracked for your evaluators, so that when they submit these back to you in procurement, if you're helping with the evaluation matrix, you might have something like this where you're getting all these evaluation scores back here and you're entering them into usually some type of Microsoft Excel version of a matrix, sometimes directly within your e-procurement system, whatever the case may be. We also like using predefined forms for your vendors. So for example, this isn't a large software procurement that I helped with recently for a city where we were asking for their implementation costs from vendors and annual costs. And then the way that was used is this is an actual picture of my evaluation matrix where we're just pulling the vendor numerical responses here and putting those into the matrix on their dollars. Christina, I saw your question on decimal points and evaluator scores in favor of whole numbers. Yeah, we are. If you're doing some type of rating scale, say 0 to 10 or 1 to 10 or whatever your preference is. Of course, I have opinions on that, but whatever that is, you don't want getting into the decimal scale territory. The reason why is what's the difference if you're using a 1 to 10 scale? For example, what really is the difference between a 6.5 and a 6.7 or a 6.3 or a 7.1? At that point, we're kind of making things up too much. And if they're that close and you have a 6.5 and you have a 6.3 and a 6.2 or whatever, maybe they're all just 6s or they're all 7s. If we're getting into decimal world, it's probably a little bit too detailed on some of the evaluation. There's more I could say there. But you have to remember that the fundamental purpose of doing an evaluation is it's the vendor's job to differentiate themselves from the competition, not your job to go into decimal territory and be like, yeah, they were a 1/10 of a point better. because of opinions. That's probably too far. Oh, I see other questions here. Ties, yep. Good point there. Should have a clause defining how you're going to handle ties. Tie goes to the runner. There's different ways that you can handle that for sure, for sure. Last thing, everyone's favorite part of the evaluation matrix is you do have to do some math. That's true. We love that. Let's do some math. You know, I said I'm an engineering professor nerd. Got to know math. But what I mean by that is, you know, let's take a look at just the approach line item on the evaluation matrix here, right? So it's worth 15%. Let's pretend it's just a simple 1 to 10 evaluation scale. So these are the average 1 to 10 scores across our entire evaluation committee. Somehow we're translating that raw data into points here, and eventually across all criteria, you're going to add them up some way, shape or form. That does take some math. There's some formulas on how to do it. There are different opinions out there on how to do it. What we particularly like is, in this case, for example, you can see approach is worth 15% here. You can see firm 1 happens to be the best score at 9.67 out of 10, and we gave them all, you know, 0.15 or 15%. And then the other firms are prorated based upon that. That's one way to do it, is to set the benchmark off of the best score and allocate accordingly. There's other ways to do it too. We find this to be the most consistent for various reasons. Okay, now, if you want more details on the math and how to do it all, I will mention that we have a recently released course for NASPO, Procurement U, our friends over at NASPO. It's a free class where we do 2 full sessions, each of them 90 minutes. So full 3 hours on how to put together an evaluation matrix. This is brand new, just released. We've been working on it for a little while. The last session we went through was in May, so you can see that was crossed off. I don't have a release date on the next time it'll be offered, but we go through specifically how to do the math on the matrix and how to set it all up and give you a template off of it as well. So something to check out and watch out for on the release schedule via Procurement U. Free to sign up at Procurement U and have an account there and check out their classes. All right. So other uses for an evaluation matrix, 2 or 3 other uses I want to mention. So first up, an evaluation matrix is a fantastic tool for putting together debriefings. And we highly, highly recommend doing a solid, transparent, and open debriefing for your vendor community. I know it takes resources on the client side to do this, takes time to put together a debriefing and hold those debriefing discussions. There's different ways to do a debriefing. But as you can see here on the screen, this is an image of one of our other classes, our Better RFPs, Better Projects class at NASPO, where we do go through about an hour of content on putting together a debriefing. And we will recommend that you use your evaluation matrix. So you can see an example here where, for example, we go through how to debrief firm C in this scenario and all the scores that they received, and how we're going to go through and do their debriefing and do like in this case, you're seeing basically like a hot and cold, where they did well, where they did not so well across their proposal compared with competitors, and what type of information to put into your debriefing. Well, if you're going to do any of that, really, really nice to have an evaluation matrix to run that quick math and do some percent differences and, you know, hot and cold spots of their proposal. So something we recommend. So check that class out if you haven't already for more information on debriefings and using a matrix within a debriefing. We go through the ways to summarize your evaluation process, synthesize all the evaluator comments, and then state the vendor's relative scores using your evaluation matrix as part of that debriefing process. I think our next class for the Better RFPs course is coming up in September. We are in the middle of a class cohort now here in June. All right. Another thing that's really nice is if you are the type of organization that does consensus meetings, then having an evaluation matrix is a nice way to aggregate scores across your committee, either ahead of a consensus meeting to display it in a simple fashion so that the evaluators can see it. You can check for consistency or inconsistency across individual evaluator scores where that becomes appropriate, which really helps you save time in a consensus meeting type of conversation. It's nice to have this work done and summarized ahead of time. Keeps your meetings on track for consensus. And then last but not least is you can use your matrix to summarize the entire RFP process for the benefit of executives and approvers who may not have been involved in the nitty-gritty details. You can show them the results, the scores, the grand totals, highlight key points for them as part of the decision factor of your recommendation to award. And it's a nice way to look professional and organized as you're doing so, which is always a bonus. So in summary for an evaluation matrix, a few things. One, we think it's an important tool to track your scores, calculate proposal points, help with your selection decisions. Procedures, they are pretty straightforward, probably not a surprise, anything that we recommended here today, but it does require some advanced planning in your RFP process. And that evaluation matrix is going to pay off again and again and again as you fast forward to debriefings, to executive presentations, to consensus meetings, to things like that. All of that is super, super helpful. And so that, another way that tool is one of those proverbial multiple birds with one stone type of a tool.
This has been Ask the RFP Doctor, brought to you by the Center for Procurement Excellence.